Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. We haven't had a chance to do a podcast since the Blackburn Rovers win, so there's been a few things have happened there. I'm joined, as ever, by Phil Smith and Joe Nicholson. I'm James Copley. New Year's Eve, Phil, all is well in the world. Sunderland are winning games. Tony Mowbray has two fit strikers, and then Ellis Simms is unfortunately recalled by Everton in a sort of a shock move. I think he was doing well at Sunderland, but maybe the one thing we hadn't all considered was how bad Everton were doing under Lampard and the pressure he's facing at the moment.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it did come as a little bit of a surprise to everyone. Certainly the pace of it. Apparently they had to. Obviously, Sunderland have been training at Carrington Man United's base while they've been in the Northwest this week, and they had to send a car to get his boots from Carrington. That was how sort of quickly and unprepared they were. But listen, at the end of the day, everyone will have their opinions on Everton's decision. I don't think it's a very good decision. I think Simms' development is better served by just staying at Sunderland, but he's literally their player. Every single loan deal you do, well, pretty much every single one has a recall clause in January. It's just how it works. And so you're always vulnerable to that. There's no real point sort of complaining about it, even though I think it's the wrong decision. And I think everyone would just wish Ellis the best. I really hope this doesn't sort of impact his development. I guess the question for Sunderland is what they do next, I suppose, because Simms, had been the perfect signing, really. He'd sort of covered for Stewart when Stewart wasn't available. He'd supported Stewart in games. He'd been exactly what you would have wanted from that sort of slot in the squad, if you like. But you would hope that given, as we said, that this is always a possibility, that there's been some planning done in terms of who they might identify. And speaking to Mowbray after the game yesterday, he said the discussions had accelerated since Simms was gone. He said there was possibly a loan in the works. There was possibly a signing for a youngster on a permanent deal. So it seems as if Sunderland, although it did come out the blue, they haven't been caught completely cold by this. And hopefully not, because unfortunately we are back in the situation where another injury or a huge bid for Stewart, could potentially have a massively negative impact on the season, which would be a real shame because it really does feel like something quite exciting is building at the moment.
It really does. I really liked Ellis Simms. I thought he was magnificent for Sunderland. Big Ellis Simms fan. But at 21, I'm not sure he's ready for the Premier League just yet. I think another 6 months at Sunderland would have really benefited him. Obviously, Lampard under pressure. Simms netted 7 times in the Championship for Sunderland. That's 18.92% of the team's goals in the league. Joe, he's going to be a tough act to follow, actually, isn't he, Simms?
He is, yeah, and I think it's a real shame as well that we didn't get to see Stewart and Simms back up front together, because we saw how kind of devastating that attack was at the start of the season. And when they kind of got paired together at Bristol City, and straight away Simms got on the score sheet. Stewart did as well that day. And Mowbray had spoken about it, hadn't he? Playing them both up front together, and we saw what a handful they could be earlier in the season when they were played up front together. So the fact that he was recalled when he was in good form as well, he'd scored against Blackburn, he'd scored against Wigan, and kind of come back from that injury and was in good form. So Sunderland do need to find a replacement. I think we probably thought heading into January with Stewart and Simms, given the fact that they'd both been out injured, Sunderland probably needed one more striker just to cover for that if one of them did get injured again. Now you think they probably need 2, because you've still got Stewart. If Stewart, they can hang on to him in January, they're probably too light there. So as Phil said, it will kind of accelerate their plans. And they'll now be looking to find not only a replacement for Simms, possibly 2 more in January, 2 more strikers.
One name, Phil, that has been doing the rounds is Jerry Yates of Blackpool. What's your sort of understanding with that reported interest at the moment? And I guess Sunderland more generally in the transfer market, as Joe mentions there, Simms leaving does fill a gap. You suspect Sunderland would have been after a striker anyway. But now, there's a couple of positions free in that squad.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, listen, January things can change incredibly quickly. So you would never be definitive about any player. I think, my understanding is that Yates certainly isn't one who's been on the radar up until this point. I think if you look at Yates, he's a very good Championship striker, no doubt about that. He's also 26, and I think it would cost a fairly large amount of money to sign him from Blackpool. So he doesn't really fit what Sunderland have been trying to do over the last few windows and want to do moving forward. I would suggest he's, if not quite at his peak now, he's approaching both his peak value and his sort of peak level as a striker. And I think Mowbray's comments allude to the fact that we might see them replace Simms with another loan, and then maybe try add in that young player who you can grow over time, and potentially give him 6 months to sort of bed in the second half of the season and then really challenge next year. So I would expect them more to go down that road, I think. Obviously, things can change very quickly, but at this stage, I would be surprised if someone went for Yates. It's certainly not something that they've pursued at this stage or are looking to pursue. We'll see how that one develops, I think. Obviously, the big one is Stewart. I don't think there's any desire to lose him this month. I don't think he wants to leave this month. But obviously, you never know. If a huge Premier League bid came in, then the situation might change. And then who knows where Sunderland would have to go after that. It would obviously leave a big hole in the squad. So still a lot of moving parts at this stage, I think. But I would more expect Sunderland to add maybe a loan and then maybe a youngster who they feel they can develop sort of underneath Stewart, if you like.
Yeah, lots of names flying around. Joe, Cameron Archer from Aston Villa, Nathan Broadhead, of course, is on loan at Wigan. Kolo Toure came out the past couple of days and said there are some players that want to leave Wigan. Obviously, he didn't mention specific names, so we don't know whether that's Broadhead or not. They also have a few other ex-Sunderland players, but you get the feeling that there are opportunities there in the market for Sunderland. It's just whether they can get them over the line in a position striker, which is very competitive in the market as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that obviously talking about a loan deal, and I think Sunderland now is quite an appealing club for teams to send their younger players. We saw that with Simms. He's obviously come in and he's done well, and now Everton feel they can recall him and he can play a part in the Premier League. But you look at Ahmad as well, coming from Man United, and his form's picked up. Even players like Jack Clark and Patrick Roberts that have come to Sunderland in League One, not in great form, and they've kind of rediscovered their form. And I think with Mowbray's kind of reputation now, what he did at Blackburn, clubs seem quite happy to loan players to his Blackburn side, and he seemed to develop them. Harvey Elliott's the name that kind of springs immediate to mind from Liverpool. So I think Sunderland now are
Diaz as well.
Diaz, he's got a reputation of developing players. So I think now if Sunderland looking in the loan market, in that Premier League loan market, they are maybe an appealing club to come to, especially when you're going to be playing at the Stadium of Light in front of big crowds. I think it's a good kind of opportunity for the top clubs, if they want to develop a player who's not going to get game time in the Premier League, go to Sunderland for 6 months and kind of develop them as a player. So that could work in their advantage, but obviously there are a lot of moving parts, and we'll see how those negotiations develop over the course of the month.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joe. I think there's been a massive sea change in the way Sunderland are viewed by football clubs up and down the land in terms of how they progress players. Sunderland have benefited from that, Phil, with the likes of Amad Diallo on loan from Manchester United. They've sort of trusted us with him investment in a sense because they've spent a lot of money on him. He's playing really well. He's a joy to watch. He's really talented. And I guess the worry is now that there's also a recall option there. And while it feels unlikely, the Simms one felt unlikely as well, and that all turned around very quickly. So please reassure us that everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, well, listen, you don't know, do you? But I would suggest that Man United are in a very, very different position to Everton. In terms of that squad seems fairly settled. They're improving. And, watching kind of the way Rashford was playing the other day, they've obviously got Garnacho as well, haven't they? The youngster who's sort of breaking through and made an impact. So at the moment, I think it's unlikely. I think from Man United's perspective, they'll be looking at it and going, they had a player who 6 months ago, off the back of a very poor loan at Rangers, it cost them a huge amount of money. And they didn't really have any prospect of making much of a return on that investment. And 6 months on, that's almost completely changed. So I think the best thing for all parties is for him just to stay, see where it takes him the second half of the season. And then Man United have either got a player who could theoretically push to be part of their squad next year, or who could sort of help them to push on in terms of bringing some money back in. So listen, I just don't see it, and Sunderland certainly don't expect it. But as you've said, the Simms one did also come from nowhere a little bit. So we'll have to wait and see. I mean, that would be a huge blow because I'm just not convinced you can find a player of Ahmad's quality to replace him, really. I think that's just going to be one of those deals where we come to look back in time and just wonder how on earth it happened, to be honest. I know obviously he's been struggling at Rangers, but he is just
Cut above, and he's brilliant.
He is a cut above, and I'm not even sure that does it justice, really, how good he is at times. So, yeah, fingers crossed. That would be a huge blow, really, because I don't think you can just go and find another Ahmad, unfortunately. But I'm pretty hopeful at this moment that he'll stay and see out the season. I just think it's working for everybody pretty spectacularly at the moment.
Yeah, I think finding Ahmad's replacement in the summer is going to be a task. Never mind in January. He does remind me a little bit of Stefan Sessegnon at times in his low centre of gravity. The way he controls the ball, his passing is brilliant. A few comments on Facebook and YouTube today. Thank you to Alan Parks, Jim Stevens, the exiled Mackham as well. Joe, the exiled Mackham, says that Speakman and Kiri Louis-Dreyfus need to realise you need to keep a core of experienced players to be leaders on the field. Bath, Evans, Pritchard, I think only have only 6 months left on the three of those deals. You've got Stewart, who is 18 months. When Serkin up as well as Serkin, 18 months. So there's a few contract questions there at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, I think Serkin's 18 months, isn't it? I think we saw at the end of last season that they kind of left the contract talks to the end of the season, didn't they? Obviously, with that, they were kind of hopeful that they'd get promoted from League One and weren't sure what division they were going to be in. But there was Bailey Wright, Patrick Roberts, and Lyndon Gooch, wasn't there? And they kind of left them till the end of the season to negotiate whether they step in earlier this season and try and start contract talks, or whether they've already maybe started them. We know with Stewart, they have been in negotiations since last year to try and get him to a long-term contract. But obviously, they are some kind of pressing issues now. I think there's been some reports linking clubs to Alex Pritchard, and if you're a championship club and you've got a player in Alex Pritchard who's shown again at this level that he can be more than a useful asset, you're going to be looking at that when he's got less than 6 months left in his contract. Still a good age as well, isn't he? Still, I think, 29. So they're kind of things that someone will have to consider. And those experienced players that you mentioned there, Evans, Bart, Pritchard, and Stewart as well, they've kind of been the spine of the team, haven't they, for most of the season? Though Stewart's been injured, but the other three kind of for a long time were kind of consistently getting picked and were really important players, even though they're kind of maybe higher age than the kind of players Sunderland were trying to sign. So they will be obviously important conversations to have over the next few months, won't they?
Indeed, we should probably talk about some football. Sunderland have played twice since we last had a podcast against Wigan and Blackpool. 7 points from the 3 games against Blackburn Rovers, Wigan and Blackpool. A canny return, Phil. Obviously, the Wigan and Blackburn performances were extremely impressive. And then Sunderland unlucky not to win against Blackpool on New Year's Day.
Yeah, I think it's been a really, encouraging festive period. I think obviously that, you've got to sort of keep it in perspective a little bit. I know Blackburn are third in the table, but I still don't see them as one of the best sides in this league. Though, of course, you have to respect the amount of games they've won this season. And obviously, I think in Wigan and Blackpool, you've got two sides who clearly are not just low on the table, but I think are having a pretty bad moment in the season. But I think that what really excites me and what really encourages me is that I think the performance level since Stewart came back has gone to another level, I think.
Yeah.
I think that Sunderland, to me, look a much better side than they did even 6 weeks ago, certainly than they did before the World Cup break. I think because you've got Stewart back and you've got that Ahmad link, you've got a little bit of strength on the bench. I know yesterday was a bit of an exception because of the injuries and the illness as well. But I just think Sunderland, have gone to another level, I think, in recent weeks. I think internally, I think they've developed a real confidence, not that they're going to win the league or anything like that, but that they can really compete with anybody. And I think yesterday was a great example where you come away unbelievably frustrated because in the end they should have won the game. But then you put it in perspective, Blackpool, finished in mid-table last year. They got promoted out of League One before Sunderland did. And you look at that game, Sunderland had almost, I counted 9 players who were unavailable with Corey Evans on the bench, but not really in any state to play. A couple of players in the team who were ill, and you come away thinking that they should definitely have won that game. And I think that just goes to show that they've travelled an incredibly long way in a short space of time. I don't think it makes them, promotion contenders necessarily, because as we've discussed, if Ahmad was to be recalled or if Stewart got injured or left, then all of a sudden I think you would see that level drop again. But I think right now, Sunderland at the moment, over the last few weeks, have looked like a sort of top 10 championship side. And at the moment, they're so good going forward, so dangerous, that it's just really exciting. And I think there's also been a couple of things from these festive games as well. Dan Neil's been brilliant. which is really encouraging because we all said that without Corey Evans, Sunderland are really vulnerable. And yet the last 2 games, Evans hasn't played a minute and Sunderland have taken 4 points. So that's a big tick in Mowbray's box in terms of a solution. And then you've got players like Abdullah Bar, who's been excellent, really exciting. Yeah, so I just feel like Sunderland have taken quite a big step forward over the last fortnight, even though I was frustrated they didn't win yesterday. And obviously it's dependent on having a good window in terms of keeping players as well as adding to it. But they really do look like a properly good championship side at the moment. It's really exciting to watch.
It's a good point Phil makes there, isn't it, Joe? Because if you think about maybe after the Cardiff game, us as journalists and reporters and the fan base and generally were quite down on and frustrated with Sunderland's midfield options. But in the space of a couple of months, we've seen Michoud come to the fore, Bar's played well. Phil mentioned Neil in a slightly different role. You'd still say Sunderland need a bit of cover and competition for Corey Evans, but the situation looks to have improved a bit now, and that's with some injuries as well.
Well, that was the concern, wasn't it, going into the Wigan game when Evans wasn't available, and we kind of looked back to that Cardiff game and thought, look what happened when Evans came out the side, and the team really struggled because they didn't have that kind of experience in there. Evans is great at reading the game, at just picking up loose balls, and Sunderland didn't really seem to have a natural replacement for him. But then in the Wigan game, Michoud came in, Bar came in and played slightly further up the pitch. And they played really well, and they played some really good stuff in midfield with those players in there. So it was encouraging to see that those players could step up and they could still record a kind of emphatic 4-1 win in that Wigan game. And then Bar came off the bench yesterday, made an impact. Neil, as Phil mentioned, has been excellent the last 2 games against Wigan, and then against Blackpool again yesterday, played a key part. So I still think Sunderland do need another holding midfielder. I think that's one of their priorities in the transfer window, to kind of have that natural backup for Evans, because I think the obvious thing at halftime we were thinking yesterday was Corey Evans probably needs to come onto the pitch because Sunderland were a bit sloppy and looked a bit off it in the first half. Clearly Evans wasn't in a kind of a state to kind of come on and play. He was just kind of on the bench to make up the numbers and wasn't able to come on, but it still felt like that's a position where Sunderland are lacking, and I'm sure is one that they'll try and look for a replacement in the window, because I think we heard in the summer, didn't they? They were trying to sign someone on deadline day as cover for Evans. The deal didn't come off, but that's definitely an area I think where the squad could still improve.
There was a milestone against Blackpool. Luke O'Nien, Phil making his 200th appearance in all competitions for Sunderland. Quite the incredible story, really, when you consider that he joined the club in 2018 from League Two Wycombe Wanderers at the time. I think for them, he was playing as a sort of attacking midfielder, or certainly a central midfielder who liked to get forward and score a few goals. Struggled initially at Sunderland. I remember he made his debut against Charlton Athletic in that home game, first game back in League One, and sort of struggled to acclimatise. But he's grown with Sunderland, he's moved positions, his attitude's been exemplary. And when you consider the time he joined the club as well, which was just after the likes of Rodwell, Kone and Dong, Dillabodji, he's really sort of been the perfect tonic to that sort of dark era of Sunderland history in terms of his work rate, his performances, and it's just his general attitude.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest praise you can give him really is there've probably been multiple times when there've been question marks about whether he can take the next step, and sort of a feeling that maybe inevitably the club would outgrow him, and he's never allowed that to happen. He's been outstanding in recent weeks. I do think it's sort of, as we're going up the leagues and going up the levels, I think we're seeing that probably defence is his best position. I think that, he's someone who benefits from having that little bit of extra time on the ball. Technically, he's actually very good, whether that's just, natural ability or whether it's through sheer hard work that he does on the training ground. His crossfield passing, his sort of long passing is excellent. And I think when he has a little bit more time on the ball to pick that out, we see the best of him. And then you combine that with the things that he's always had. He's athletic, he gets stuck in, he doesn't get beaten in the air or on the floor very much. I think you can see that, defence is definitely his best position. I remember Jack Ross initially moved into right back for it was a checker trade trophy, as it was called then, because he said, actually, when you look at Luke, he wins most of his headers. It's very rare that he gets done one-on-one. And so I think we're seeing those elements of his game come together now. And you have to give him a lot of praise, because at the moment, even when all of Sunderland's defenders are fit, I think Luke O'Nien starts. And obviously he's going to have to stay at a really high level to keep some of these players out of the team. But, I don't think there's any guarantee whatsoever that Danny Bart comes straight back into the team, or that Adji Elise comes straight back into the team. I think 09's there on merit now, not just because of injuries. And that's the biggest compliment you can pay him. Every time someone go up a level or somebody comes in to the squad and you think that maybe, 09's might be be one who ends up sitting out, he finds another gear. It's incredible how often he's done that. And as you say, he's been an amazing servant to the club.
Interesting question, that, Joe, isn't it? Who or what features in Sunderland's sort of best defence, whether it's 2 centre-backs, 3 centre-backs, whatever you want to go with?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because there could be some players missing out.
It would be nice to have everybody fit at once, wouldn't it? So we can actually find out.
Yeah, sometimes it kind of just kind of happens, doesn't it? That you have a kind of dilemma, and then Dan Ballard gets injured after 3 games, or Danny Bart gets injured at Hull, and then that's Dan Ballard's opportunity to come back into the team and play well. So sometimes it works with that, and Elise has obviously been out injured as well. But it does give options to kind of move to a back 3 as well, and that's what would have also made it good to kind of, that system would have allowed them to play 2 strikers, wouldn't it? If they play with a back 3, you could have played Stewart and Simms up front with the wing backs. Potentially, if they bring in another striker or 2, that could still happen, with another striker can come in and play alongside Stewart with the back 3. But there's definitely some interesting options there. And as we've mentioned before, 09's been excellent at centre-back. Even yesterday wasn't one of his better games, but he'd missed training the whole day before. We spoke to him after the game. He'd been one of the players that had been quite badly affected with illness. So he hadn't trained the day before. Probably wouldn't have played if Sunderland had other options available, because he had to catch up with all the tactical side and stuff in the morning of the game, because he hadn't been part of the training session the day before. So that kind of, again, just shows his commitment, that he was willing to step up and play when he wasn't 100%, and still give his all for the team. And he's been excellent in the last few weeks. Probably one of Sunderland's, if not their standout performer in that centre-back role. Had a good partnership with Danny Bart, where you had kind of one player that would kind of head the ball away, kick it away, and Danny Bart, it was kind of a bit more no nonsense, and then 09's more of your ball playing centre half. That kind of worked quite well. And now he's formed a good relationship with Dan Ballard. He learns off Bailey Wright as well, who was behind him with 09 on that kind of left-sided centre-back role. So, yeah, he's adapted really well. And I think, as we've said, I think his best position now is centre-back, and it'll take a lot for him to move him out of that position.
Absolutely. 2022, Phil, is a year that will live long in the memory. You've written about this extensively on the Sunderland Echo website, but you look back at January last year, and Sunderland lost 6-0 to Bolton. Lee Johnson was sacked. Alex Neil came in. There was the Defoe stuff, the eventual promotion, Alex Neil leaving, Tony Mowbray coming in. It's been an interesting one, but ultimately a good one.
Yeah, hugely successful in the end. I think that, 2 main aspects of it, really, if going into, well, maybe not quite going into 2022, but going into the start of that season, so sort of summer of 2021, I think the two big question marks for the club were that sort of on the pitch development and that off the pitch development. And I think in 2022, in getting out of League One, and also, although it took far too long and it was a very bumpy road, Kirill sort of consolidating his control of the club and sort of resolving that ownership structure, at least, to a large extent in the summer. Those were 2 huge steps forward for Sunderland. And I think there was a lot of learning moments, I'll be generous and call them that, along the way for, the hierarchy, whether it be the sort of lack of transparency around the ownership, whether it was 1 or 2 things in the transfer market, whether it was, that managerial pursuit. I think there were a lot of learning moments, a lot of difficult moments, but I think that helped the club end the year in a pretty strong position. And I think if you look at what we have at the moment, you have a squad that is playing some genuinely fantastic football. I look forward to going to watch these players. I think it's a really, really exciting time. And I think there's also, a lot of stuff that I'm sure they still want to develop, and, it'll be interesting to see how things develop in the next few years. Obviously, there was a lot of damage done to the academy, obviously, as we know, in the few years before Kirill came in. But you've now got a really sort of talented group in the under-18s and the under-16s. These are the little things that I'm excited to see in 2023 and forward. Whether we can see that work that we've seen on the first team, which has been really positive, will we start to see that sort of flow through the club. But it was a drain in 2022. It was an incredibly long year, or it certainly felt like it. Where I think all you can ask for is that you come out the other end better for it. And I think that, Sunderland are undoubtedly better for at the end of 2022 than they were at the start of it.
Some brilliant moments, though, Joe. There was a lot of late goals towards the end of the season. Obviously, the two playoff games stand out in the mind in terms of Sheffield Wednesday at home, the crowd being there. And then at Hillsborough, you had the late goal to win the tie, to draw the tie the night up, win the tie. And then, of course, there was Trafalgar Square and Wembley. So there's been some real memorable moments, which, to be fair, Sunderland did have in League One with Wembley appearances, but they didn't end well. This time it ended well, which was nice.
Yeah, it's probably, that was obviously the standout moment. Wasn't it promotion at Wembley, but probably the biggest moment I still feel was that game at Hillsborough, because I felt the Wembley game, I thought they were always favourites for that game. I was pretty confident they were going to win that one. The one at Hillsborough, when they conceded that equaliser, I thought they've kind of, you could say, blown it. But it really felt like the tide had turned. And just think, if Sheffield Wednesday had won that game, how different the past 6 months would have been if they'd been still in League One.
They would have all had their
World Cup.
Yeah, games through the World Cup. Yeah.
It'd have been completely different. So that was a massive goal, I think, from Patrick Roberts at Hillsborough. Just a massive swing of momentum when it looked like the tide had turned, and credit to those players for kind of turning that around and getting the job done. And it seems crazy, doesn't it, that less than a year ago, Sunderland lost 6-0 at Bolton. In what was a really kind of low point for the club. And then you had the Lee Johnson sacking, and then you had those 2 games where the team was kind of rudderless. So, yeah, it's been a kind of a whirlwind 2022, but I think the signs now are really encouraging for 2023.
Yeah, the team that day against Bolton, in which Sunderland lost 6-0.
It wasn't much different, was it?
No, you had Hoffman in goal, Serkin left back, Callum Doyle centre back, Danny Bath centre back, Carl Winchester right back, Corey Evans in the middle, Dan Evans in the middle. Dan Neil in the middle. Embleton as a 10, Diakhou on the right, Gooch on the left, and Stewart up front. Roberts came off the bench, Jack Clark came off the bench, Pritchard came off the bench. Other substitutes included Trey Hume, Anthony Patterson, Aidan O'Brien, and Tom Flanagan. I guess, Phil, testament to Alex Neil for turning that side round into a promotion-winning team.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a funny, that one, isn't it? Because obviously it was an absolutely horrendous day. But a lot of good things had happened before that Bolton defeat that we did eventually see come off. So a lot of the, by that point, I think that was Clark's debut when he came off the bench, possibly Roberts as well. So they hadn't had a chance to make an impact. Patterson obviously would come into the team and do brilliantly.
I think it was Bath's second game or something. Bath's second game or third game.
Yeah. So I think that in some ways it was a tiny bit misleading, and a lot of good work was already in place before then. But what we obviously had is Sunderland were caught here between the kind of the longer term philosophy, and they were at times being incredibly naive with the teams they were taking to strong League One sides away from home, and we'd seen them get done a few times, hadn't we? And I think what Alex Neil did do incredibly well was he sort of came in with that ruthlessness, almost saying Callum Doyle's a great player and he's having a great season, but he's tired and it's not going to work for me just now. And it was the same with Dan Neil. So, although it was that kind of like darkest hour before the dawn kind of vibe, the fact that you reading that team out there does underline that a lot of good work had already taken place. But at the same time, there's no doubt that at that point, it looked like Sunderland were a good League One side, but one that wasn't going to have what it took to fully get over the line. And that was the difference that Neil made. And he did an incredible job. I mean, he'll never, I know obviously the way he's gone has soured things to an extent and stuff, but, not every manager could have come in and done that. I think we all know that. And Joe mentions, the Sheff Wed games, Wembley, every single decision he made was absolutely spot on. Embleton not kicking the ball across the 2 legs and then starting in the final. And the way he managed it emotionally, the way he was so unfazed, he was brilliant. And it was a real blow to see him go. But then again, the club's moved into a new phase, and at the moment, Mowbray looks a fantastic fit. The football's great. You trust these young players. It's been a really good year, and I think that for all it needed Alex Neil to get Sunderland over the line, I think you would have to say that some good work had been done in 2021, certainly the second half of it as well, to start building, that squad that was capable of going on and doing what it's done.
Absolutely. And just very quickly, we'll start with Phil again, but expectations for the rest of the season and the rest of the year, 2023 now. What's your opinion of where they should be? Because I was talking to some friends, and I feel like Sunderland have as a club have raised expectations just by recruiting well and playing well and being well coached. They're exciting, and I think fans can see that there's potential. But I suppose it's about walking before you can run. I know a lot of fans would like to see Sunderland really push on now. I'm not sure whether that's possible or whether it's in the minds of the hierarchy. Where do you sit on this whole debate, Phil?
I still think a top half finish would be an outstanding season, like a properly outstanding season, and I think that the platform would then be there to really kick on the season after. So my expectation, my hope is that Sunderland can challenge for a top half finish. I don't want to be sort of seen to be negative, because I do think with a fair wind, I do think they could make a real go of it. But when I look at the table, I just look at clubs like West Brom and Middlesbrough, whose budget and whose level of experience within their squad is well in excess of Sunderland's, and they seem to have worked themselves out now in terms of those early season struggles. They've got good head coaches in who've made an impact. So I just think for me to actually get into that top six this year will be incredibly challenging. At the moment, I just can't quite see it. And yet I do believe this group of players can beat anybody in the Championship on their day as well. So I still think, I'm hopeful that they'll sort of stay in the mix for a while and just make it a really fun, enjoyable experience. And I think that if they can finish anywhere in the top half, I think that would be an extraordinarily successful season. And I guess throwing it forward a little bit, I do think there's every reason that they can then kick on again. I suppose the two things in my head, which we've kind of alluded to, if I'm throwing it forward, way forward to the summer window, is that if, for example, Stewart and Ahmad were to go, that would leave two pretty huge holes in this current side. And that would be a big test in terms of getting replacements in who could do what they've done straight away. But obviously that's a way off in the future. But yeah, I'm just hoping for more good football, and hopefully, like I say, they can make us dream for a bit longer, because that's what they've done over the last week or so. But I still think anywhere 12th or above would be an outstanding season. I mean, anywhere between 12th and 15th would be an excellent season. But anywhere, you know, in the top half would be an outstanding return.
Joe, where do you stand on the debate? Phil raises a good point there. And I guess you could sort of bend it a little bit as well and say that, is there a better time when you've got two players like Ross Stewart and Ahmad Diallo? You may never have a better sort of 9 and 10 to really push for promotion. Obviously, you would like to think that eventually Sunderland would, and it's a process and whatnot. But with those two and the way Mowbray is coaching the side at the moment, you can just sort of see it's a possibility, and that becomes really frustrating when you can see that it could be a possibility for it then maybe not to happen. It's one of those things, I guess, in football.
Yeah, that's why I think it was a bit frustrating as well to see Simms leave as well, because you look at the season so far, Sunderland were, I think until yesterday, I think they maybe still are the third highest scorers in the division, which is remarkable considering they've played most of the season without their two fit strikers. And you just thought with Stewart coming back, with Simms coming back, they can really have a good go here. And there's not really been any standout teams in the Championship. You'd say now Burnley and Sheffield United have pulled a bit of a gap away. And you'd probably say that they're kind of the two clear favourites for the top two. But below that, there's not really any standout teams, were there? But as Phil mentioned, West Brom and Middlesbrough then kind of teams are getting their act together now. At the start of the season, I think most people's top six prediction was the three relegated sides with Norwich and Watford as well. So it'll depend on kind of who Norwich appoint and what direction they go in. But Sunderland are up there, I think, so far this season. They've not lost by 3 goals, have they? The biggest margin they've lost by is by 2 goals. So they've been competitive in kind of large parts of every game. There's not been one game we've come away and thought they've been completely outplayed there. There's been obviously some games where they've kind of had disappointing performances, but there's not been one game where you think they've been completely played off the park for 90 minutes. So they've been competitive in every game. I still think, as we said before, a top half finish will be a very impressive achievement. Alex Neil mentioned that stat, didn't he, at the start of the season? I think the last 4 seasons, the highest any team has finished from getting promoted from League One is like 15th. And a lot of the teams that have won the playoffs have gone straight back down. Obviously, Sunderland are a different kind of club in kind of the growth and the ceiling of the clubs that can come up from League One. But if they can kind of stay in that playoff mix, I think if Stewart stays, if Ahmad stays, they've got a great chance of being kind of an outside chance to get in those playoffs. And who knows, last season Nottingham Forest went up by the playoffs. Luton and Huddersfield were in the playoffs, teams that you probably wouldn't expect earlier in the season. So it's a cliche, but the Championship's an unpredictable league, isn't it? So, and Sunderland have proved they can compete more than compete in it.
Sunderland versus Middlesbrough in the Championship playoff final. Could you imagine that? Bloody hell. That's a thought. Right, that brings us to an end of today's Raw podcast. Thanks for joining us, gents. Happy New Year to you both. Sunderland aren't in action in the league until the 14th of January against Swansea, but they do play Shrewsbury Town away from home in the FA Cup this Saturday. We'll have all of the build-up to those two games, including post-match press conferences with Tony Mowbray. Joe will probably be back with some opposition view on the podcast. But yeah, once again, thank you for listening and have a good New Year.